Welcome, everyone. It's great to be here for another deep dive into the law of one material.
Yeah, always fascinating stuff.
So today we're going to be looking at a really crucial message that Ra gives,
Hmm.
and it's all about archetypes. And this message may actually cause you to kind of rethink how you use certain spiritual tools.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yeah, so as we kind of explore Ra's teachings, a central theme keeps popping up, and it's unity, the primacy of unity. And within that understanding, Ra offers some guidance on how we relate to symbolic systems, and particularly these archetypes.
Right.
And that's going to be really significant for anyone on a path of seeking. So what we really want to do today is grasp Ra's cautionary perspective on this,
Okay.
why they specifically warn against worshiping archetypes,
Got it.
and how this perspective can help you in your own personal quest for knowledge and truth.
Yeah, makes sense.
So to kind of anchor ourselves here, let's look at this quote from Ra in session 97. They say, "Let no consideration of bird or beast, darkness or light, shape or shadow, keep any which seeks from the central consideration of unity."
Wow, that's a powerful statement.
Yeah, this single sentence is really the cornerstone of our entire conversation today.
Yeah, it gets right to the point, immediately where the emphasis lies. Archetypes, they can definitely capture our attention,
Right.
but they should never be the ultimate focus. Part of the journey, signposts along the way,
Right.
not the destination itself.
Yeah, and the material we have for today really unpacks this. Ra gives some pretty direct insights into the true nature and purpose of these archetypes and all these different energies and symbols.
Okay.
So one of the first things I think we should look at is that Ra makes it very clear that archetypes are tools to be used,
Okay.
not belief systems in and of themselves,
Right.
like resources.
Yeah, and Ra really spells this out in session 97. They say, in no way whatsoever should we wish to place before the consideration of any mind-body-spirit complex the idea that these images are anything but a resource for working in the area of the development of the faith and the will.
Yeah, so we can look at this in terms of like the tarot, the patterns of astrology, any kind of symbolic language, really.
Yeah,
And Ra is presenting these as instruments, catalysts for inner work
right.
to help us cultivate faith and will.
Yeah, I find it interesting here that Ra uses the word development.
Right.
They're not saying that these tools give us faith and will. They're providing a framework, like a language,
Right.
through which we can nurture and strengthen these core aspects of our being.
Yeah, it's an active process. It's
Yeah.
not a passive thing.
Yeah, it's not like, oh, I'm going to go out and get some faith. It's like, no.
Right.
You use these tools as a way to develop your faith.
Yeah, they're meant to spark understanding within us, to resonate with something deeper. And they're definitely not these like sacred relics or inflexible rules that must be followed to a T.
Absolutely. And I think a good analogy here is like that old saying, the map is not the terrain.
Right.
And the tarot, for instance, is not the truth. It's a compass pointing you home.
Right.
It's a way to orient yourself.
Yeah. So the map can be incredibly useful.
Yeah,
But if you confuse the map with the terrain, you're going to end up in a really weird spot.
right. You won't know where you are.
We won't know where you are. So now this is where I think things get really fascinating.
Okay.
Ra also gives us some insights into the nature of the archetypical mind itself. And it might not be what we intuitively assume.
Okay, so what are they saying?
Well, Ra says in session 97 that the archetypical mind does not resolve any paradoxes or bring all into unity.
Hmm.
This is not the property of any source which is of the third density.
Right. So the third density, that's where we are now. That's our current level of experience as human beings.
Mm.
And so the archetypical mind, these symbols, it's not going to magically bring everything into alignment.
But it's not going to solve all of our problems.
Right. It's not like a magic bullet.
Right. So these archetypes can be valuable.
Yes.
They can help us navigate the complexities of being human,
Yes.
but they're not the end-all be-all.
No, they're not the ultimate answer.
Yeah.
They're reflections of the creator's pattern, the design of our local universe,
Yeah.
what Ra calls the logos,
Right.
within this specific density of experience.
Right.
But they're not the infinite unity itself.
Right. And I think sometimes we can fall into this trap of thinking that if we can just master these systems,
Yeah.
if we can just really understand all the nuances, then we'll understand everything.
Yeah. It's like thinking that if you study the menu enough,
Right.
you're going to be full.
Right.
No, you've got to eat the meal. You got to have the experience.
Right. So it's not just an intellectual pursuit.
Right.
And this leads us to what Ross says is the ultimate goal, unity. And in session 97, they say, we are not messengers of the complex. We bring the message of unity.
So simple, but so profound.
So the exploration of these archetypes,
Yeah.
It can be beneficial.
Of course.
It can be really engaging, but it should always serve that higher purpose of realizing that we're all connected.
Absolutely.
Mm.
It's a journey of remembering. You're peeling back the layers of illusion
Right.
and recognizing that underlying unity.
So it's like this constant reminder.
Yeah.
Stay rooted in that awareness of oneness.
Yeah. And I think the mistake a lot of people make is they think that by studying these archetypes,
Hmm.
they're going to achieve unity. But Ra is pretty clear that that's not the case.
Well, yeah, in session 97, they say, the archetypical mind does not resolve any paradoxes or bring all into unity.
Right. So the realization of unity is a very personal experience. It's a shift in consciousness. It's not something you can force by memorizing symbols.
Right. The archetypes are more like tools for reflection.
Yes.
They prompt us to look within ourselves.
Right.
Not to try to solve some kind of intellectual puzzle.
Absolutely. So it's not the archetypes themselves that are living this life.
Right.
It's us. We are the ones making the choices.
Mm.
We are the ones experiencing this reality.
And Ra makes this really clear in session 92, where they say, it is not the archetypes which live the incarnation, but the conscious mind-body-spirit complex.
So again, it's about recognizing our own agency,
Right.
our own responsibility for our spiritual journey.
So it's not the archetype of the hero
Yeah.
that's dictating our actions. It's not the lover that's controlling our relationships. It's us.
Right.
We are actively choosing how we want to live our lives.
Exactly.
We are choosing to embody love or not. We're choosing to exercise our free will.
Right. And the archetypes can give us some context,
Hmm.
but they don't dictate our choices.
They don't define our being. And this brings up a really interesting question.
Okay.
What is the role of archetypes in our spiritual evolution?
Yeah.
Are they the foundation upon which we grow? And in session 91, Ross says, the archetypes are not the foundation for spiritual evolution, but rather are the tool for grasping in an undistorted manner the nature of this evolution.
So they're not the ground beneath our feet as we walk this path.
Right.
They're more like a lens,
Right.
helping us to see things more clearly.
Right. So they're not the cause of our evolution.
Yeah.
They're helping us to understand how we are evolving.
Right.
So as you're listening to this, think of archetypes as a reflection of your inner state.
Yeah, not a definition of it.
Not a definition, right?
They're like mirrors. They're showing you your potential. They're not some kind of master telling you what to do.
Right. And so Ra is saying, look at these recurring patterns.
Yeah.
Understand the dynamics, but don't mistake the reflection for the original.
Right. Don't get caught up in the image.
Don't get caught up in the symbol.
Yeah. And it's interesting to consider why these archetypes exist in the first place. And Ross says in session 90 that each logos desires to create a more eloquent expression of experience of the creator by the creator. The archetypical mind is intended to heighten this ability.
So the logos, that's our local universe.
Right.
And the design of this archetypical mind is to enhance our ability to experience and express the creator in a more profound way.
Yeah, and Ra uses this really cool metaphor here, comparing the archetypes to a peacock's tail.
Okay.
Each archetype is like a feather in that tail.
Yeah.
Beautiful, intricate, revealing a facet of the creator.
Right.
But the tail itself is not the creator. It's an expression.
It's an adornment.
Right. It's a way for the creator to know itself.
More fully.
Yeah, through all these different experiences.
And it reminds me of that idea that the mirror is not the mystery. You know, we look in the mirror, we see our reflection, but if we start to worship the mirror itself, we've forgotten that we are the source of that reflection.
Right.
And so Ra is warning us not to make that mistake with the archetypes.
Yeah. And don't think that the archetypes are some kind of fixed set of divine laws.
Right.
Because they actually came about through a process that Rao describes as spiritual experimentation.
Yeah, in session 91, they say, you must grasp the idea that the archetypes were not developed at once, but step by step. They were using two separate ways of viewing the archetypical nature of all experience.
So they're not fixed decrees. They're templates that emerged through the exploration of consciousness within this particular logos.
So they're kind of like blueprints
Right.
for this particular reality.
Exactly.
Now let's talk about the veiling.
Okay.
So the veiling is that forgetting of our true nature when we enter third density.
Right.
How does that relate to archetypes?
Well, in session 79, Ray says that prior to the veiling, the magical potential in third and fourth density was far greater. However, there was far, far less desire or will to use this potential.
So it's like the veiling made us forget our connection to the one.
Right.
And so we start seeking understanding through these symbolic systems.
Yeah, the veiling made the archetypes more useful,
Right.
but it also created the risk of mistaking the symbol for the source.
Right. Like thinking that the map is the actual territory.
Exactly.
So it's this double-edged sword.
Yeah, and it's important to keep that in mind as we explore these archetypes.
Yeah. Now, what about the Great Way? How do archetypes fit into that?
Okay.
In session 92, Ra says, look at the Great Way not as that which is attained after contact with intelligent infinity, but rather as that portion of the archetypical mind which denotes and configures the particular framework.
So the archetypes are like the framework,
Right.
the underlying structure of the Great Way.
Right. They're describing the stage upon which the journey unfolds.
Right.
But you are the participant. You are the one walking the path.
Yes.
So the archetypes are like the architecture, and you are the artist,
Right.
creating your own unique expression.
And again, Rao emphasizes in section 92 that it is not the archetypes which live the incarnation, but the conscious mind-body-spirit complex.
So you're living this life, not the archetype.
Exact.
The archetype is just showing you a possibility.
Yeah, it's like, the fool in the tarot.
Yeah.
The fool doesn't make you leap.
You leap.
Right, you leap. The archetype is just showing you that leaping is part of the design.
Now let's talk about magic.
Okay.
In session 79, Ra defines magic as the ability to consciously use the so-called unconscious.
So how do archetypes fit into that?
Well, they can help us access the unconscious mind, which is full of all these symbols and instincts.
Right.
But the real magic comes from our will,
Yes.
our faith, our intention.
The archetype is a key, but you are the one who unlocks the door.
Now, what about embodying an archetype? Is that something we should strive for?
Well, Roz addresses this in session 89 and says, clothing oneself within the archetype is an advanced practice of the adept, intended to intensify and articulate some aspect of the magical personality.
So it's a method, not the goal itself.
Right. It's a way to explore different facets of yourself.
Right.
But ultimately, you're meant to transcend those identifications.
Right, and recognize your core essence.
Exactly.
Now, Ra also points to one crucial element in all of this, choice.
Okay.
In session 88, they say, the one great breakthrough was the proper emphasis given to the arcanum number 22, which we have called the choice.
So every archetype points back to this fundamental decision, service to others or service to self.
And that's the true gateway to unity.
The archetypes can show you the different paths,
Right.
but you are the one who chooses which path to take.
So now, are these archetypes universal? Are they cosmic principles?
Okay.
In session 90, Ra says that the archetypical mind is the repository of those refinements to the cosmic or all mind made by this particular logos and peculiar only to this logos.
So they're specific to our local universe,
Right.
not universal laws.
Right, and they're tailored for third density.
Right, so other universes might have different archetypes.
Yeah.
Different systems.
Right. Now, Ra uses this image of striking flint and steel to describe how we interact with archetypes. They say in session 90 that at the point at which an entity, either by accident or design, reflects an archetype, the archetypical mind resonates. The disciplined use of this tool comes far later.
So when we align with an archetype, it resonates within us. But the real transformation comes from the disciplined use of our will.
So the archetype is the spark.
Right.
But we create the flame.
Yeah, the initial resonance is just the beginning.
Right.
True understanding requires conscious effort.
And Ra also emphasizes that a true understanding of these archetypes goes beyond just studying them intellectually.
Right.
In session 76, they say, after a period of study, the seeker may then complete the more important step. That is, the moving beyond the written in order to express in a unique fashion its understanding of the archetypical mind.
So it's not about memorization.
Right.
It's about integration.
Right. It's about living the archetype.
Exactly.
Expressing it in your own unique way.
Right.
And Rhea also cautions against getting too fixated on these systems.
Right. Trying to make everything fit perfectly.
Yeah.
And in session 78, they say, it is informative to view the relationships, but stifling to insist upon the limitations of congruency.
Yeah. So don't get too caught up in trying to make everything line up perfectly.
Right.
Use your heart as your guide.
And this brings us back to Ressa's most important teaching on this.
Okay.
Don't worship the archetypes.
Right. And they say this very clearly in session 97. They say, in no way whatsoever do we wish to place before any mind-body-spirit complex the palest tint of the idea that these images are anything but a resource for working in the area of the development of the faith and the will.
So these images are not sacred in and of themselves.
Hmm.
They're valuable because they reflect our potential.
Right. And true spiritual power doesn't come from external rituals
Yeah.
or memorizing meanings,
Right. It comes from within.
from that connection to the creator.
And in session 64, Ross says that the reason we engage in ritual is because of the awareness that such expression is a great protection when appreciated as transmutation into the presence of the one creator.
Right. So the power of ritual comes from that inner connection.
Right. It's about awakening the divine within.
And it's also worth noting that Ra doesn't endorse any specific system.
Yeah, they're not trying to create a new dogma.
Right. In session 92, they specifically say the astrological symbols offered are not given by Ra.
Right. So they're presenting their information, but they're not saying it's the only truth.
Right. And even their own teachings are not meant to be seen as a complete and infallible system.
Yeah, in session 97, they say, we wish not to form that which may be considered a complete and infallible series of images.
So they're offering their teachings with humility
Right.
as doorways to personal realization.
And so Ra offers this beautiful piece of guidance. In session 97, they say, may we ask the student to look up from inward working and behold the glory, the might, the majesty, the mystery, and the peace of oneness.
So explore the inner landscape.
Yes.
Engage with the archetypes.
Yeah.
But remember to lift your eyes and experience that unity directly.
Because ultimately, we are not messengers of the complex. We bring the message of unity.
Right. And that's what we need to remember. Don't let any symbol,
Yeah.
any image, keep you from that central consideration of unity.
And again, just to reiterate, the archetypical mind does not resolve any paradoxes or bring all into unity. This is not the property of any source, which is of the third density.
The real answers lie beyond the symbols,
Right.
beyond the intellectual constructs.
Yeah, each archetype, as Rez says in session 88, is a thing in itself, not a summary of relationship.
So engage with them with an open heart.
Yeah, don't try to overanalyze them.
Right. And remember, they're not the ultimate reality.
Yeah, and they're products of our current experience. In session 90, Ra says, the images of the archetypical mind are the children of the third density physical manifestations of form.
So they're not eternal laws.
No, they're specific to our current reality.
And the real transformation happens within.
Yes.
Ra says in session 89 that the controlled use of the archetypes is that which is done within the self upon the most subtle of levels.
So to wrap this all up, archetypes are valuable tools,
Yes.
but they're not the ultimate truth.
And they're definitely not something to be worshipped.
Right.
The focus should always be on unity.
Yeah, that's the message Ra keeps bringing back to us.
Right. So keep exploring the archetypes.
Yeah.
Use them to open your heart, expand your mind.
But don't let them define your path.
Right.
Or limit your understanding of the creator.
So here's a final thought for you to consider.
Okay.
You are not contained within the archetype.
Yeah.
You are the light that illuminates it.
That's beautiful.
You are the source.
Yeah, you are the archetype.
You are the mystery.
You are the one infinite creator.